Welcome to the Pitchwerks podcast. I'm Scot McTaggart. Over the last 20 years, I've been a sales rep, a marketer, a manager, an executive, a consultant, and an advisor. This show is designed to give you access to my list of contacts so that you can learn more about how to present your ideas at work and succeed in your career.
Startups and salespeople, marketers and managers from the Epicast Network in Pittsburgh. It's the Pitchwerks podcast.
Where are they starting from? What misconceptions might they have? What fears might they have? What questions might they have? How might this resemble something they already know that you can relate it to? The first step is just engagement.
Hey everybody, it's Scot. It is Wednesday, and that makes this your Pitchwerks podcast, and I really appreciate you tuning in. Thanks so much as always. This week, we are talking to a true communications expert, Norm Goldberg from ThoughtForm. You're going to love this conversation. I get to geek out. It's going to be great. Before we jump into the interview, you know what I'm going to do, and that is I'm going to pester. I'm going to pester, and I'm going to say, why don't you talk to me on social media? It's always Pitchwerks. It's not like you forgot the address. PITCHWERKS. You can find us on LinkedIn. We've got a company page. It's a Twitter. It's an Instagram. It's a Facebook. I don't know. We just use Google. You know how this works. Throw a .com at the end. You come to a website. It is properly maintained and in keeping with all of the HOA rules. Norm is here to talk to us about consulting and about design and about empathy with your user and how it is that we run discovery. And this is super useful for all of you, whether you're in sales, marketing, startups. Check it out. All right. So a show about communication brings in an expert in communication, Norm Goldberg, principal over at ThoughtForm. How are you?
Great, Scot. Good to join you.
It's really cool to have you in here because you're going to help me tell a story, and hopefully I'll help you tell some of your stories along the way too. But we have to set the table. Everybody has to know, sort of like where you're coming from and what ThoughtForm is up to, right? So fair to say that you're a consulting firm, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay.
Accurate.
Yeah. But there's a design, there's a visual element to it. Is that also fair?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think that's what really distinguishes us, is that we combine consulting with visual design.
So if and this is not a shot at you, this is actually just sort of sizing up the way the market is, right? Like if I'm looking through the yellow pages, where do I find you, right?
Yeah. That's a question we get a lot. Where do I plug you into my constellation of consultants?
Or to my understanding. That's the first step, is like, if I were to introduce you at a cocktail party, like what would you frown at and what would you smile at? Because we're all in that world now where consulting is changing.
Yeah, absolutely. And everyone is much more aware of design than they used to be, and all the things that go with it, empathy and user-centeredness. But what we like to say is that we're a communication design firm that brings beautiful clarity to complex ideas. And we find that our clients over the years have been up against more and more complexity in their work.
There's no question. You can feel it everywhere. The expectation of this year is that it's harder to manage than last year, no matter what other subject creeps into that sentence.
Be it technological complexity or
political complexity, just understanding how to get stuff done inside your company.
My gosh, yeah. Diversification of product lines, service lines, it's hard to keep up with. So,
and my first introduction to your company was actually the website, right? Where there were little like detail things, okay? I don't know if this is the term that everybody uses, but I've always called it the hamburger icon.
Yes.
Right at the top right, where you can kind of find your way through and get to the rest of the menu or whatever. It is kind of, I don't know, disorganized at first, and then you mouse over it and it becomes the icon you expected.
Yes. It's a tiny little metaphor for what we do.
That's cool. And I saw that and I was like, that's a lot more work than it looks like it was. And it's a great jumping off point for this conversation, right? You put that much work into just making it so that the hamburger icon stacked itself when you moused over. And I said, you are paying attention to those fine details.
Yeah. It's a process that begins with details and it ends with details. And there's a whole big mess in the middle that we have to carve through with a machete. We probably had a 15-minute conversation about that icon between us. So
yeah,
glad someone noticed.
Not only did I notice, but It's the difference between saying you are something and choosing to be that something. And that's how I read it, right? Like if you're going to say that you take communication to a previously unheard level of scrutiny, you've got to, that's demonstrable. You have to be able to show it somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And even that little detail. And I hate to make it into like a mountain out of the molehill, but here's why. Because I know how much work it took to animate that thing. Like we're talking, that took somebody hours.
Yeah. And the thing that is funny about that is that it probably took a little while to set up the animation, but then it probably took forever until we thought it was just the right timing.
Not too much disorganized.
Right.
Not too fast to organize itself, right?
Yeah. All of us as designers, we have this inner sort of nerd who wants to tweak and tweak and tweak and make it perfect. But for us, that's the very end of the process. The beginning of the process starts with something very fuzzy and undefined. Oftentimes, we're working with an organization that's doing something pretty mission critical, pretty big, launching a new enterprise or a new product line, or trying to apply a new technology across the enterprise, and so many unknowns. And we just get a bunch of people in the room and work through it using a lot of techniques that we have.
So let's go back to that question. Where do I find you in the yellow pages is a metaphor in itself, right? I'm saying, like, how do I decide to engage ThoughtForm? How do you see that customer journey beginning?
Well, many of the relationships that we have are with clients who we've worked with for years, so they sort of know when to pick up the phone and call us. But I think anyone who is in charge of a fairly significant project and has a sense that if it isn't understood, it's not going to succeed. At least it's not going to fully succeed.
But how are they finding you? Like, how do they even find ThoughtForm? Because I said at the beginning, like, you're going to help me tell a story, right?
Yep.
The story that I'm really struggling with lately, and it's been rattling around in the back part of my brain for some time now, is the fact that consulting is weird right now. Like, everybody is squishy and undefined. They all have to have one hand on the user experience piece, and they all have a strategy element to them. And it's kind of hard to parse it past that, right? Like, everybody kind of looks the same under those rules.
Yeah. Well, if I answer the question literally, I bet a lot of people just use certain keywords that our site is attuned to, and they come to our site and they're like, okay, at first they can see, well, seems to be a communication firm. They seem to do some things that are pretty complex or pretty strategic. Oh, and they have some unusual processes that I haven't seen before. They are able to draw an illustrative diagram that depicts an entire process or system in a very engaging way. I've never quite seen anyone do that before. So, maybe that's a little bit intriguing.
It feels like you probably get a lot of word of mouth referral. Is that right?
That is true. That is true. Yeah. And we've been called everything from the designers who think to the IDEO of information for people who know IDEO, a world-renowned design firm. We really focus in on taking information and knowledge and making it work hard for people.
People call you much nicer things than they call me. I visited your website and I saw, for example, like Caterpillar was one of your clients.
Yes.
And that's obviously a name that a large number of people are familiar with, right? That's a great client to be able to brag on. What did you do for Caterpillar?
Yeah, it is. We've worked with them for a long time, and we've, I think, established over the years an increasing level of trust so that they're able to come to us pretty early in a process and say, we are trying to make a transition from just selling iron, big machines, 3-story dump trucks and earth moving equipment, to selling technology-enabled services that go along with those. And their technology is kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah.
They can use GPS and telecommunications to control a piece of equipment within inches. But
remotely control it.
Yeah.
Oh, that is interesting.
Yeah. And so, how do you monetize that? How do you sell that? How do you teach your sales force how to sell something that isn't a bulldozer?
It was created by a product manager for a reason.
Yeah.
But what was that reason, and how do you communicate that value to people downstream?
Exactly. And how do you communicate it? Most of our projects have a kind of a two-part. How do you communicate it internally? And then how do you communicate it externally?
Right. So you designed a training program for just the salespeople, or was it a larger group, customer service? How did all that work?
Yeah, it was the whole customer-facing operation. And prior to that, we had to socialize it among a wider group within the company. But it really started, as I described a little earlier, with a bunch of people in a room. Imagine a room that every surface is covered in some kind of a poster that represents a different exercise that helps us work through a different aspect of the offering and the challenges and the strategies. And we take people through a very structured thought process.
What does a finished product look like in terms of the goal? I have to believe that, at least when I consult, right, I try to boil everybody down to one sentence. Give me a mission so that I know, is it on, off? Like, did we do it or do we not do it yet? Right? Do you work the same way, or is it a longer list of goals?
I think it's probably a bit of a longer list of goals. It's things that are a little hard to measure quantitatively, because we're not really just doing a website and measuring clicks.
Okay.
We're measuring a complex set of transformations that are supposed to happen within the company. So if you're there, you're hearing it in the way people talk about this. Do they understand it now? Are they talking about it in the right way?
So I was talking to, you probably know Darren Grove from TrueFit.
TrueFit, yeah.
Yeah, we had Darren on the show a couple weeks ago, and one of the conversations Darren and I had to touch on was like the way that a project gets estimated can make or break your chances within that account, right? And in consulting, and he does software development, which it sits right next to that strategic management consulting, because he's developing a product out of nothing. And I asked him, I said, do you make people do the long jump where I have to tell you all the costs, or can you actually do small bites, like a discovery phase, like a minimum viable product phase, like that sort of thing? And what essentially he told me was that let's just do a discovery, pause, regroup, and then price the next phase after that.
Yeah. I think that with our work, oftentimes there's no way to know where it's going to go. We start at such a early stage. We start so far upstream of where you would normally start with a typical design brief that the client's fully aware there's no way to know where this is going to go, what we're going to need. And our first phase often is a research and what we call vision catching phase, where we get the stakeholders together and get them to get all their ideas and hopes and dreams and issues and constraints and opportunities out onto the wall. And then working with them through that, we can come to some communication tools that are going to make sense.
Who is a great prospect for ThoughtForm?
Well, it's interesting. We don't typically work with the marketing function of an organization. We do sometimes, and we enjoy those folks quite a bit. They understand our world and vice versa, but we work often with operations folks.
Okay.
Who are trying to implement a new technology or launch a service line. And typically we work with a team that's cross-functional. So it's fascinating for us because it allows us to kind of peek behind the curtain and see how the whole enterprise works. And so it could be anyone from a director to a VP, sometimes a senior VP, and they're charged with a pretty daunting task.
But it has to be a fairly large organization, am I right?
Well, we typically work with, the Fortune 50s, 100s, 200s. They've got the big problems and they've got the resources. But we, sometimes we work with a nonprofit who has a really interesting little problem. If there's a strategic aspect to it, it's a good fit for us.
I asked the question mostly just, for people to understand how your process was formed and with what sort of like life experience, because you've 30, how many years now?
ThoughtForm's been around since 1980.
Okay. So over 38 years, you've watched as consulting has changed. Expectations have changed. The level, and you said this before we turned the microphones on, and I'm kicking myself that we couldn't include it, but you said a lot of it has to do with an understanding that you need empathy for the end user or the audience, right?
Yes.
I want to expand on that.
Yeah.
Because it seems like you were there already, but other people are coming to that same conclusion. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. I think with the growing awareness of design and what it's about and what it can do, that's become something that people have become aware of in the last 10 or so years. But for us, there's always been kind of a two-part problem. One part is understanding and untangling and solving the business puzzle. What is the offering and how should it be structured and presented and what's the value and so forth. But the other part is, how does the user need to come to it? How does the audience, we often use the word audience because we're doing visual communication.
Too, right.
Do you? Yeah. It seems to fit. And how do they need to come to it? Because
is that a way of saying
they've got a whole perspective, a whole framework, a whole life of their own that doesn't necessarily match up with your talking points. We think of it a little differently than, I don't know, perhaps an agency thinks of it. An agency needs to kind of get you, build your affection for a brand.
Yes.
And I love the work that they do. What we do is a little bit different. What we do is trust that if you truly understand this offering and you understand the larger context and how it fits in your life and what it offers you and what it's going to take for you to make use of that value, you'll make the right decision. And our clients have amazing stuff. So if you understand it, we think you're going to go for it.
You understand that it's not about saying the right thing. How about this? When I'm being a wise ass, I say, this isn't Hogwarts, right? It's not about saying the right incantation. It's about understanding that they start off not necessarily wanting to hear what you have to say. And there is a journey to interest, and there is a journey from interest to action. And there's a longer path maybe than just give me the Hogwarts spell.
Yeah, absolutely. We call that the engagement process. I think it's the same thing you're talking about. And it's knowing where are they starting from? Mm-hmm. What misconceptions might they have? What fears might they have? What questions might they have? How might this resemble something they already know that you can relate it to? The first step is just engagement. And that's one of the reasons we talk about beautiful clarity. Clarity is a powerful thing, but if it doesn't have a human element,
it could be stark clarity.
Yeah.
Right.
It can it can be off-putting.
Yeah. Very off-putting. The uncanny valley of presentation.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's fantastic. I love the fact that we're talking about this. It's one of those things that always felt a little bit too inside baseball to really bring up because I'm not sure people are following me when and I don't know, maybe I underestimate the audience.
It's foundational. Absolutely.
If there's one thing that people hate, and this is how I've always tried to relate it to people. People hate that completely unbelievable, everything is always perfect pitch machine. Right? The company's always right. The products are always perfect. Everything is gorgeous. And you should just buy 3, right? Like they hate that.
Yes.
And from that, I sat and learned, or I tried to look to see what lesson I could learn. And that's when I discovered what you call the engagement process, because they're not at the point you're at and you have to meet them where they are. So now whenever something is potentially troublesome, I like to bring it up first because that's where they're at. Is they're worried about the rumor they heard, or with enough market research, what conclusions they jump to, and you meet them there.
Yeah, absolutely. And a metaphor that we use a lot that we find useful in our work is that, here we are, we've done all this homework, we've rolled up our sleeves, we've waded through all this complex information, distilled it, sorted it out. Now it's our turn to be the host for that audience and to give them a great experience, a great understanding experience that doesn't leave them with lingering questions or anxiety. We have to know our content, but we also have to know them.
We just completely changed what story I wanted to tell with this now. Like I'm just throwing the notes away now. You can say there aren't actually notes, but in this giant head of mine, there are notes. I assure you. And now that we're actually talking about meeting the customer and engaging the customer, as opposed to looking for the perfect pitch, I didn't even, like I said, I never thought I'd have a dance partner for this one. So unfortunately, we're gonna have to enjoy the roller coaster.
Oh, I'm
for
a total
second.
nerd on this.
We're totally off script. This set of tools is applicable to the website. It's applicable to the marketing slicks. It's applicable to everything else. How much of that do you want?
Yeah. Well, we like to say we're media agnostic in that we don't have a bias toward websites or toward direct mail or
You're
toward
right.
print.
Actually, let me rephrase the question then to make it, because what I'm really talking about is people who have a transactional mindset, right? Somebody who just says, I need to check a box. It says, I need a slick, right? So somebody's manager goes and is like, Kevin, go make us a slick.
Yeah.
And it's just a task. It's not strategic. It has no sort of higher inspiration. It's like, well, they told me to make a leave behind so that when salespeople get kicked out of the office, they can put something on the conference room table.
Right.
So I guess what I'm saying is more transactional in my question, right? Like how much of that transactional, again, more run rate thinking versus the larger strategic 2-year project?
Well, we don't like to do all the strategy and get that all sorted out and then just throw it over the wall to somebody because there's so many nuances that we're aware of by that time. And at heart, as I may have mentioned before, we're craftsmen. We like to tweak. We like to make a beautiful thing. We like to create an artifact that
you quit trying to hire
sing.
me, okay? You quit trying to hire me right now. That's fantastic.
And so it's often our privilege to do it end to end.
Yeah.
And that's really what we. Now that said, at some point the collateral or whatever is being produced starts to become cyclical, and it starts not to be. We start not to be a good value for that.
You're not inventing anymore,
right? And so we might develop templates and guidelines and things of that nature that enable a marketing operation to carry it forward.
Well, because this dovetails into a conversation about the plummeting cost of production, right? There's some guy in Romania right now who thinks $5 is all the money in the world.
Right.
And that's no disrespect to that person. It's just a fact of life. That's the global economy.
Yeah. Digital technology has made everyone a photographer. It's made everyone a writer. It's made everyone a designer. And
good ones.
Yeah.
Like in a lot of cases, really good ones.
The amazing thing is that all this latent talent, right?
Yeah. Well, the tech does a lot of the work too, though, right?
It does.
So you've got the filter that makes your Instagram that much more interesting.
Right. So that's, part of the larger forces that have sort of led us toward how can we really add value in this equation? How can we add value through analysis and distillation and thinking and a real understanding of our client's business and, solve really pretty thorny problems.
When it goes wrong, how does it go wrong?
There are many ways. We talked about organizational
But I'm not the only
challenges.
one.
Yeah. Sometimes the organization just makes a left turn. And
rules change.
The rules change.
Yeah.
Sometimes a new person comes in with a different perspective, different point of view. And, we can roll with those things, but sometimes it's, out of our hands. So
right.
We're on to the next one.
You have to be. I just, so much of consulting, and I'm going to put a little bit of sales nerdery into this conversation, right? So there's this thing called the step close, right? And the idea is that if this is true, then I will ask you if the next thing is true. And if that's true, then I'll ask you if the next thing is true. And this is how I get buy-in across, let's just call it a longer string of things I need you to agree to, right? Mm-hmm. And I document this, right? And there's so many different systems that use some variation on this thought process, right? You use that step close partially as a way to nail down a scope of work. So you say like, okay, so we're going to reinvent your marketing to talk about GPS assist, right? I'm going back to the Caterpillar example. Yes. Okay. And we're going to do that to sales and customer service. Yes. Right. It proves that you get it, but it also makes them put it in writing. They recognize that they changed the rules of the game, and you have a chance to put it back together. Put it in a more crass way. It's almost good, because then it's a change and an increase in work if people can't make up their mind what their strategy is.
Yeah.
How's that for crass?
Yeah. Well, I think, as I was saying, a lot of our clients are folks we worked with for a long time. We know how their business works. They know how we work. And, we build in some flex because nobody can predict everything. And if we're going back to them all the time, obviously that's not in anyone's
No, if
interest.
you build it for change orders, then you're the jerk and eventually you'll be out of clients.
So we anticipate that there's just some normal evolution that happens in the course of a project. But, our clients, they get it. They understand that all we have to sell them is our time and our expertise. So if things change, then we'll sit down and talk about it.
To what extent does broad data analysis start to figure in here, right? I mean, back in the days that, sort of I romanticize, right? It was a person with a muse, right? It was like this lightning strike of inspiration, and you would say, everyone's going to love this, right? But now we can attack the data in such a short period of time that it's actually more useful just to look at sort of like, what part of the website did they click on? Or, what did they say in this survey that we sent out, 2 months ago? How does that all figure in?
Yeah, we love data. When there is data, we find that there's oftentimes things are too new or changing too quickly for there to be a really, at least in the projects we do, a great store of data that we can build on. But the first phase of our work is always some sort of research. Once we've got an understanding of what the client wants and what they're trying to achieve, but our research is often very granular. It's often very qualitative. We want to go out and see where the product is being sold and what that environment is like. We want to talk to some people who are buying it and understand what their perspective is. And we can correlate those granular insights against whatever data the client has. We're not really, a quantitative research firm, so we don't really center there, but we love insights and we love wherever they come from.
I have to believe that if they have a data provider, they probably have a seat at the same project table when you do your kickoff, though, right?
Often there's a market research person there, and sometimes those insights can be extremely helpful. Sometimes they can almost be a little over-relied upon. We think that there are a lot of inputs to the process, and balancing the data with your knowledge, your intuition, your experience.
Now you're going where I was going, which is at what point do you basically have your own data lawyer in your own corner defending your own work?
Yeah. Well, since we're not really data analysts, we tend to be the guys who are bringing the kitchen logic to the table and stepping back and looking at the larger picture. And with a great team, you sort of triangulate and you find the truth among all of that.
You see, that's where I'm going to depart, right? So I called it your data lawyer for a reason, because, if there was objective truth in the law, then, we wouldn't have the court system backed up the way, right? They've got their lawyer, you've got yours. I really think there's a metaphor that sticks here. It does feel like lawyering.
Yeah. Well, I think where this is probably most acute is with consumer products, mass market products, because they do have a ton of data.
Yeah.
And they're looking at every click on the website, and they're looking at every purchase in the store. And, they're paying guys out of Stanford $100,000 out of school to crunch that stuff. And
like oracles. We just put this person on the team, we will know the future.
Right. And there are amazing insights that weren't available before, but I think often our work is somewhat in advance of that, in the sense that it may be a B2B project where there isn't that kind of data. The consumer is a little downstream from us, and it's just a matter of reckoning among your expertise, my expertise, the research we do have, and trying to blaze a trail forward.
That's awesome. I love this conversation. We've reached that point where, unfortunately, I got to cut us off.
Not already.
It is already. I wish I were lying, but I'm not. It really has been illuminating. Norm, I appreciate the time you've given us.
I've enjoyed it greatly.
If anybody's looking for you, I assume we want to send them to the ThoughtForm.com website.
That's us.
And if they have any specific questions, is there like a contact page on there or something? Or is there a social media presence that you want to direct them toward?
Yeah, it's all on the website.
Oh,
they
easy.
can find us.
Nice. One-stop
anywhere
shop
they
for
want.
all that.
Yep.
Norm, thanks again.
Thanks, Scott.
All right, that's the end of the show. Thanks so much, as always, and thanks to Norm and Kevin over at ThoughtForm. Really, really great conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. We're going to put another show together. If you haven't subscribed already, make sure you do that. We're going to drop sales, marketing, and startups onto your phone every single Wednesday morning. You'll get it a little bit before everybody else. It's just great for everybody. It's just high fives all around. We'll catch you next week.
The Pitchwerks podcast comes to you from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a production of the Epicast Network and McTaggart, LLC. Engineering and production by Buzzy Torek and Nick Miller. For more information, show feedback, and ad sales, visit pitchwerks.com. pitchwerks.com. On social media, find and follow the show on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram using that same brand name, pitchwerks.